Welcome, everybody. Thanks for joining me today for the JavaScript and Oracle Office Hours. On the line, we have Chris Jones as well as Anthony Tuninga. Blaine is not with us today, unfortunately. Just yesterday, Chris, well, I guess yesterday, today, depending on how you look at it, what time zone you're in, Chris went ahead and pushed out the latest release for node-oracledb, woohoo, version 2.2. So what I will do is share my screen, and I'm currently looking at the changelog. So if you go to the Oracle DB repository and then scroll down to the changelog, you'll see that here. And of course, we're looking at this latest release here. So let's just start going through them. Chris, what's this first one about?
Sure. Actually, I'm going to start at the bottom or in the middle where that link block is. So one thing we did do is create these GitHub pages so that people might know that, github.io. And so we tried to move some of the doc and things there. I kind of was up in the air. Should I move the changelog there or not? I haven't yet. So that's still back where you were just showing it on the GitHub source code repository. But we'll try and make these github.io pages the places people go to refer to production doc. And that will let us fiddle around with the source code and make changes and what have you without people really noticing it. So that was a sort of big change there. You know, nothing major. Everybody does that in open source projects. Just hadn't kind of got around to it before now. And I guess it's really a matter for us in terms of the development process, just letting us, as I say, go and play with the source code in the github.com repository, and while everybody's looking at the github.io site. So Dan, I've been hassling you to try and update a few doc links there, so we get some link karma onto this site.
Right.
Formatting's a little nicer, although one or two things break because the render is slightly different than it is on the github.com site. So I have to go and tweak a few things. Like I did something yesterday post-release. But anyway, that's one of the changes we did. You know, just push that out. So I think now all of the links on the github.com site are tending to go here. And if you want to go back, oh yeah, you're at the changelog. So again, open question, should I move this one to the github.io site as well, duplicate it? And also, how should I tell people who come to the github.com site and look at the existing old doc there, the api.md file there, how do I tell them really they should be going across to the other site? So suggestions welcome. Where else do we go? So we have always had some client version and database server version information available. Anthony and I had long discussions about this when ODPI came along in the 2.0 timeframe for Node, because I liked the numeric format, so code could just compare one number, you know, 120111000, you know, which is a 12 dot whatever I said, 12.1 or something like that. But ODPI exposed strings and numbers in the end. Anthony and I made a compromise, so we did it both ways in the lower layer, and so we've just finally exposed the string variants of those through to the driver. Makes it easier if you're going to print some of this stuff out. But internally, I still think if you're doing a test to check some feature is going to be available in your particular version, then you probably want to be comparing with the older number format, which I guess I could click through and just show you when that decides to wake up. So yeah, so we have both the numeric format and the string format.
The numeric format was always very confusing for me. I could never quite wrap my head around how that would be useful. Do you have a example of doing such a comparison, or?
Yeah, it's if Oracle client version less than 1200100000. I mean, basically you take your 12.102 or 12.202 or 18.0.0, whatever you're up to, put it in, take 18, let's do 12.12 to, 0, 1 or whatever up to, into this format. And then your code just has one simple numerical comparison because you've already pre-calculated this number. What do I have? I guess in the PHP world, we tended to use this a lot more for version comparisons because a lot of the tests there had to work. We were using 11.2 version of Oracle, and we were using version 12, so it was just much quicker to do it in the programmatic way. But if you're just printing it out to the users, then just use the string. It would be easier if I did have a solid example, but I don't.
I almost have one ready.
Okay, yeah, I could have typed it. So Oracle Edition, so enterprise-based redefinition is a feature really of, I call it PL SQL, but it's probably more of the database. Effectively, you can have two versions of any function with the same interface, that same signature in the database at the same time. Normally, that would create, one would replace the other, or you get some kind of error if you try to do that. But by changing the edition that your session is running in, your connection to the database is running in, then this enables you to have, here we go, sorry, this one. By changing the edition, then you could have a second copy of that method. And let me just shrink this a little bit. Just hello, wake up. Okay, now you want to wake up. So you could have both versions of this discount method in the database at the same time, and you could toggle between them simply by changing with this alter session command, which version of that method was going to be called by your application. So this lets you, change your logic, change a whole bunch of things. This is also applicable to things like views, and there are cross-edition triggers so that data can be inserted in one place and updated in the other, and all sorts of fancy, wonderful Oracle-ish things. But from the node-oracledb point of view, really you're just worried about how do I set this edition flag. And we know that in the client-server world, as we call it, if you're running in node-oracledb, which is a client of the database, then anything like an alter session is going to be a round trip between those two computers, and that's going to impact ultimate scalability. So don't do it if you don't need it. So we now have in node-oracledb a setting which sets it and doesn't require that particular round trip. So basically you're saving some overhead when you use this method of deciding which edition you want to use.
For the folks that maybe aren't aware, I started a series on creating REST APIs with node-oracledb and Node.js with Express. And this is definitely a topic on my list of features to cover, because EBR is really one of those features that differentiates Oracle database from your run-of-the-mill sort of open source database. The ability to make schema migrations while your API stays live the entire time is a pretty incredible feature that once you learn how to exploit can maybe impress your boss for sure. We'll also take a look at other features such as, there is Sandes, if I'm saying your name correctly, pointed out that we should have some examples that cover some details related to rack. So that's another really Oracle-specific feature I'm looking forward to covering as well. Mm-hmm. And I have that demo ready. If you want, I can go ahead and share it or let you continue.
Let's run on because we've got actually quite a lot to talk about.
Sure.
This is something that you just come back and cover.
Mm-hmm.
To do events. So this is actually partly answering that rack question. How do we work with rack? And the answer is, again, from the Oracle driver point of view, the Oracle Node Oracle module, it's the same as anything else. So go and look at generic documentation. All we need to do is give you this new events mode flag and wake up renderer. Again, it's kind of connection level. Here I'm going to show you the top level property, but you can override it when you're getting a connection or a pool. And then as long as your database service, whatever is in the back end that you're connecting to, the rack system or single instance or whatever is configured, then you're going to get things like runtime load balancing. So, I don't have a lot of doc here because it's not really our area. As I say, it's all kind of generic behavior of Oracle database documented in other places. There is a nice white paper on this, but effectively, if, people may know rack clusters, you get like 2 copies of the database running at the same time. And if one of those disappears and the other's still running, so your users shouldn't really notice any difference. And things like this runtime load balancing means that you're going to be balancing work across loads. One of those rack nodes, one of those rack nodes,
instances,
yeah, that's a better choice. Maybe busier than the other. Fan as a way of getting notifications back, particularly useful if there's a real hardware error. That's often the best place, and there might be some kind of hang. So anyway, so that's really this events mode is the kind of the key that we have, and then the rest is go off and set up the database service to actually send events. I know there is more we can talk about because that's quite a bigger topic, but bit by bit we'll get there, fill in the details. So Anthony got quite busy and added a few methods. Some of these were more pass-through than others down into the lower layers. So again, we did that big restructuring in 2.0 of node-oracledb and rewrote the abstraction layer underneath. And so that abstraction layer had a lot of the code support ready, and we could just expose it. So change password, I don't think I really need to go in detail in that. The little trick with changing password is sometimes if you have an expired password, you have to connect and change the password in one operation. You can't connect because your password is expired. It won't, Oracle just won't let you. But it gives you that kind of grace period where you can change it if you're still in the grace period. So you can specify when you're getting a connection, you can specify the old and the new password, and it will let you connect. Okay, I'll come back to that because this is the big one we want to talk about. Get statement info. So I don't have a lot of doc on this. Time defeated me. Don't have any kind of real solid examples, but you can look at the test suite, etc. if you want to find some stuff. Basically, this is going to give you the same kind of metadata that you got, plus the list of the bind variable names if there are any bind variable names.
I have a quick example on that one. When we switch later, I can demo that one as well. Mm-hmm. This is one of those functions you just got to kind of remember it's there just in case you need it in the future. It's somewhat low level, but it's about getting metadata about the statements that you're executing or SQL queries that you're executing. Mm. And so if you're building really flexible types of applications, this is a real powerhouse feature that prior to it, you'd have had to have done a bunch of PL SQL magic and pretty ugly stuff.
Yeah, it's not perfect in itself. It's based on the lower level C layer, which has some very historic behaviors, which doesn't recognize some particular statement types. And it will actually parse statements and therefore give you syntax errors if you've got syntax errors, except we deliberately disable that for DDL statements. And the reason is that DDL statements, when you parse them, they actually execute, which is a little problematic. So we didn't want those DDL statements, your create tables, to actually suddenly execute when you thought you were just getting a little bit of statement info. So, you get some information back about what kind of statement type it was. So we get the standard metadata for queries, column names and things. DDL, a create table won't have column names, but you won't get particular parse error messages there. So that's just one little quirk. And then also, unfortunately, again, this lower level OCI layer doesn't know what's happening in terms of bind variables. So it can't really tell you which directions and types and things, which is pain. But anyway, it's there, it does what it does. It's particularly useful for queries because it will tell you the
exactly
the bind variable names for queries. But watch out, it does do that round trip. So, don't do this and then do a statement execute if you don't need to. Prefer just doing statement execute and checking after the fact. I mean, code is there to be used, but this will bite you if you start using it just randomly everywhere. Unless your application is designed to do that.
Well, you could also cache the result of the check, but of course, like any cache, you got to invalidate it if necessary.
Yeah. Well, let's wake up. Where are we going? Okay, let's get on. So connection ping. So system health checks. So quite often people wanted to know, what's going on. Is my database still valid? Is my connection to the database still valid? So did the network drop out? When in the connection pool, we get a connection out of the pool, we do some of those checks for you. But if you're in the middle and you've got a long-running operation, you may want to do your own explicit check. A round trip again, buyer beware. So don't do it unnecessarily. But it basically checks that at one connection, the connection that you're running this on, is usable. So it checks what we call the session. In Oracle land, we have the connection and the session. The session is kind of the instantiation, the process, the memory for that connection. And it checks that that's all usable without going through to the SQL layer. The alternative is to do a select from Joule, standard select one from Joule, which is a little more heavyweight. So this should be kind of useful if you're trying to do some kind of health checks. Again, it just checks that one connection. It doesn't replace all your normal error checking at execute time. Okay, so then I see David Chen has just popped a question up in the chat. So people not familiar with the chat, there should be some kind of flashing light there on your Zoom interface. And David has a question. David, that is actually a question for database people, and we are not particularly database people. We are driver people. So planning to implement reference partition based on a hierarchy.
I will say though, if I see millions, more than 1 million partitions, that does sound excessive.
Yeah.
That does go down to the physical layer, so you're going to end up with a lot of files resulting from that. I would think that suggestion there over 2,000, I don't know where that came from, but if that was from Oracle Doc, it's probably trustworthy. But we could get you in touch. Have you considered asking this question on AskTOM?
AskTOM.
I'll put the link here in the chat.
So this goes down to our direct colleagues. Oh, look, hang on, there's a direct colleague. It goes down to our colleagues who are more SQL and database savvy, and we'll be able to answer that kind of question more directly. I'm sorry that I just don't know. I mean, we have to focus on our area, which is, as I say, the kind of client, not so much the database. Okay, so the big one, I guess, was this execute many. And we debated about the name because really it should probably be called execute batch. JDBC calls it execute batch. However, in our space, in our drivers, we already had the precedence of calling it execute many in the Python driver. So we stuck with that, which kind of made it easier for us to reuse doc and explain concepts and point people at information which wasn't directly about their environment. So it really, I need to go to my blog, sorry. Let's look at the blog example as the first. This is the release note when my computer decides to wake up. Okay. So this was the example that I just had in the kind of release statement that I go through some more code examples in a minute. So really it's executing one statement many times. It's not executing many statements. And I know we have people who want to try and run SQL Plus scripts in Node. That's just not going to work. You know, that's got many SQL statements in a SQL Plus script. Not this. This is one statement, many data values. And I've spoken about those round trips. So instead of sending statement data, statement data, statement data, statement data, this sends statement, lots of data. So it's fewer round trips. So this can be extremely efficient. And I have one little kind of example down here. So I had very close database and desktop. And I had, it was a number and a very short string, order of 12, 15 byte string and one number, and execute many to insert 1,000 records, 1,000 rows, 16 milliseconds. And the old execute in a loop, having to call execute 1,000 times, took 2.3 seconds. So from the number of GitHub issues that people had asked about this and Stack Overflow questions, and those following will have seen me updating every single one. So future Google searches will get the right information about execute many. This was something which people were kind of interested in.
I think there was a question today that came in an issue. I'm just going to put a link to the comment. So the question was, does this offer any advantages over executing batches via PL SQL associative arrays? And I think Anthony's answer was really good.
You can call PL SQL and SQL statements as well, DML statements.
Yeah. So I think
not DDL or queries or anything like that.
Anthony got into the technical details, but the very last sentence there is, to me, perhaps the most important, which is you don't have to write all of this wrapper code, custom array types and all this craziness just to take advantage of bulk processing. Here, it's just your regular SQL statement and the array of data that you want to shove in the database, or it doesn't have to be an insert. Could be different types of statements, but it's just a far more elegant way of writing the code than was possible before.
Yeah, so you can call DML statements, your update, insert, merge, delete, and PL SQL, and then we have slightly different controls depending on what you're calling. So this is the basic insert example. So you want to, the scenario is I want to insert all of these records, so these will become rows of the table in the end. And traditionally I'd have to call insert, whatever these are, 9 times or whatever. Sorry, call execute with an insert statement 9 times. Here, I can just call, well, there's my insert statement, but down if you look at the bottom where I use it, I call execute many, this new kind of parallel of the execute method. I call it once, and I just pass in all of the bind data.
It's important to point out that you said call it once, but if you're dealing with a lot of data, right? You cross that line between, I don't know, maybe tens of thousands to hundreds or millions of rows. At that point, you do still have to kind of batch on your own side for now.
Yeah, I mean, it's going to send all of this data across in one packet, or one packet,
right.
One round trip, and you could flood network buffers or database network listener buffers, or whoever, anything else down the stack which may or may not be specific to your environment. And so if you are up in the tens of millions, whatever, benchmark it and work out whether you want to call this once or multiple times. So let me just work through this for people who haven't seen it. So there are various options here. There's another one called DML row counts, which I can show you another example of later. Oh, and the other interesting one we'll get to is that you can use it for returning into, which is kind of cute if you're doing an insert and you want to get the row IDs back. You can use the returning into clause in the SQL statement. Insert into, returning into, and you could get the row ID back. And then out of it, you get an array of row IDs, one per inserted row. This particular example, as you probably read ahead, has some data errors, duplicate keys, parent is not found in a sort of nested table scenario. And by the magic of this new batch errors option in the option syntax, options parameter, we actually get back an array of errors. And this is zero-based array, so positions 3 and 6, 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 had errors, and they are not inserted. However, the others were inserted, which is good. I mean, if you've got noisy data, you sometimes just want to get as much in as you can possibly, and then you can come back, and by knowing these offsets, you can go and work out what the errors were, maybe reinsert them, decide that you can just discard them, whatever. The little trick here with batch errors is that the auto commit is ignored if there were errors. It's respected if there are no errors, but if you do have errors, then it's ignored. And so that although a transaction does get started with these other 6 rows, and you can just commit or roll back yourself, that's a choice which we leave up to you, so you don't get inconsistent data inserted if these particular values were important for your data set. So we do have some samples. Should I go through any of those?
Yeah, real quick. There's a question in there, Anthony, I think for you regarding append. Does the execute many understand the append hint? Direct path load.
Yeah. It should.
Not tested it, but it should.
Yep.
Is there a sweet spot for batch size? Question. The answer is sweet spot for you, yes, but I don't know what that is because I don't know your environment.
Yeah, got to test.
Don't know your network latencies. Don't know your memory available on the machines. Yada yada yada.
Yeah, if you've got small rows, you can go to very large numbers, even millions, without too much trouble. But if you've got very wide rows with very long strings and so forth, then the amount is going to drop substantially.
Yeah, the graphs of performance are quite significant. I showed you that number before. I think, what did our stress tester doing? She was doing like 11 rows, each with 32 kilobytes of data in the 11 rows. And then the difference between execute and execute many was only like twice or something rather than the multiple times. Yeah, so it has its usage, but yeah, just let us know how you go with it, what you find works and doesn't work. So here are all of the samples in the GitHub samples directory. I pretty much showed you one of these before, the batch errors with the insert. DML return, oh, by the way, and they're variants, both variants of these, courtesy of Anthony. So we have the async await variant, just because we had it handy. So if you haven't seen the async await variants, then looks pretty similar. This is what I was showing you before, insert binds options. So sometimes this is a little easier to try and work with without having to do callbacks and what have you. But the key of it, of course, is up here. So DML row counts, I should probably run this, except my database isn't started. I can probably do that while Dan goes and explains some other stuff. So actually, is it in the doc? Did I end up docking this?
Moment of truth.
GitHub. Where are we going? We want to go to the doc, which is now on here. Sorry, just let me clicking through. Normally I have my bookmarks up. So batch, batch statement execution. Okay, there we are in the bottom half. So, okay, so we have the DML row count option. So this is a delete, and you can understand that this particular key may be repeated. If this was not a unique key, you may have multiple rows which match each of these values in the database. And sometimes it's useful to know how many rows exactly were matched by this particular operation. How many rows had key 20, how many rows had key 30, how many rows had key 40. So with this DML row counts option in the options parameter, we then get back, and obviously, depending on the data, you get different values back. But my fake scenario here was that I had 3 rows with ID 20, and therefore I get 3 back. So I'm getting an array, 1 entry per input array, and it's the count, the count of the rows which are affected by this DML operation, hence the name DML. So you wouldn't get this back from if you called PL SQL statement.
Yeah.
Data errors we just showed. DML returning, kind of alluded to, nothing really magic. Obviously got 2 bind variables here, but only one sort of bind in the input. That's because one of these is an in bind, and therefore you're not binding into the other one. Bind def options I didn't speak about, but I should have spoken about. If you don't have this bind defs option, then we're going to be trying to parse this input bind structure for sizes and types, which means basically scanning the data to find the maximum size, which is going to be slow. So generally, even for input, and we're going to assume it's all input binds as well. And so in this case would fail because you've got an output bind. But the general recommendation is that you always use bind defs because then it removes the need for the driver to actually go and scan every single data item, which is, we're speaking about millions, could be significant. One little kind of problem is that if you get the max size wrong, then the whole insert will fail. If it's the max size is too short, and then obviously if max size is too big, you're just going to waste memory. So you need to be mindful of the fact you don't want to make it too small, but you don't want to oversize it. So anyway, as you've read ahead, you just get back 1 entry. It's actually an array of arrays because each of these, if you're doing a kind of different operation, you'll get multiple values back in the array. Here we had fairly standard insert, but we still get the array of array structures, array of array structures.
Yeah, a delete statement like the one you showed with your array DML row counts.
Yeah.
If you did a return of the row IDs there or some other column, then you'd get back multiple entries in that array.
Yeah. So you get multiple entries mapping to each one of these.
Yeah.
And then finally, just showing you the doc, which I'm sure you can read. So I have a standard procedure here. So it's, takes 1 in, returns 2 out procedures, PL SQL procedure. And basically we're going to pass in 1, 2, 3, 4. So we're going to call this 4 times, passing in 1 the first time, 2 the second time, 3 the third time, etc. So we're not passing these as parameters. Yeah, let me go back. Let me ignore that. You know what I mean. Again, set the bind defs, make sure you tell what's coming out, strings, therefore we need to know the size. And if you looked at this, we're returning a number which is twice the input number, and we're just sort of concatenating this X on the end in the loop. And so effectively you get both of those parameters back, 1 per input bind. I was calling them a record. And that's it. It's kind of straightforward when you see it. Took us a little bit of design to think about how we wanted to do this bind defs and what have you. We did have some precedents there in Python already using execute many code was ready in the lower data access layer. And so in the 6 weeks since 2.1 was released, we were able to do this in the 2.2 release. Is there anything else that I missed that I was going to come back, or did you want to show the get statement info there, Dan?
I can, sure.
Let me just check, just quickly review. What do we do? We talked about those, password, execute many things. Yeah.
So the first one I got info here. Yeah, this is actually before get statement info, this is comparing those client versions, the numeric versus the string versions, and just runs a quick test, pulling both from the base class as well as from a connection instance.
So are you sharing your screen, or am I?
Yes.
Am I not?
Yeah.
It might be behind. Where am I? Oh yeah, there it is. Oh, there's too many windows open. Okay.
So in this case, you can see my client version is 12.1. Numeric version kind of hard to parse, but the string version really nice and easy. And then the connection returning my database info. Mm-hmm. And you can see I have a mismatch. I need to update my client version here. Mm. The other one I have here is this get statement info. And so we're just getting a connection to the database. And I did a star just to show, you may not have the actual columns listed, but you can still get the data. And also I did a bind so that we would get some of the bind info. So we're just using this rather than execute, we're using get statement info and storing that and then logging out the results. So when we run that, you can see what we're getting back here.
So it's effectively the extended metadata. Yep.
Exactly. As well as the bind data down at the bottom.
And a statement type.
Yeah. So the statement type, did you show them the constants on that?
No, but there's a new set of constants which is documented in the manual, at the top of the manual. And that has, these number mappings.
No, just look for statement type.
Huh. It's way up the top.
There they are.
Got it.
So one maps to select there.
Right. Perfect.
And you notice a few things are missing, like merge and merge is there. There are a couple of other things possibly missing, but anyway, we give you what information we have, and then we'll hassle the people that give us that information to try and improve it in future versions.
Cool. So is there anything else we wanted to touch on for the new release for 2.2?
No, just to say we've got a couple of conferences coming up. So anybody who's in Bangalore in India, this time next week, there's the Oracle Code Conference, and our colleague Venkat will be presenting a paper on just getting to grips with a simple web service, how to install, how to run, what to do, showing you that stuff, showing a lot of containers. And then effectively a week after that, on the 17th, I will be in Boston, USA, just showing a little bit about this execute menu that we've talked about. So you kind of got a head start on that.
Is that Oracle Code?
Oracle Code again, Oracle Code Boston's. I don't know whether you want to pop up the website there. All right, get you to it first. So this is a series of developer conferences. And okay, I've got it. So developers code, developer.oracle.com/code, and you can see some of these things coming up. If I get my visa, I'll be in Shenzhen. Speaking about Python. So anyway, yeah, so we've got a couple of conferences coming up soon. And I know some of you are in various regions. Seem to be some interesting stuff going on. We saw some action on the GitHub issues about people using GraphQL. And one of those people is in Sao Paulo. I wonder whether we can convince him to speak at that conference. But anyway. So that's it. The other thing I think I mentioned last time, we have a Facebook group, not much action happening there. And since I don't know anybody that tries to just meet me with other people, I don't know. But anyway, there's a Python discussion group public group. So, if you're just trying to follow what's going on, you can keep up to date with the updates here, or you can follow any of us on Twitter. And we tend to just do the same things. So, yep, I should add a link to my presentation in Boston. But anyway, those are just a couple of other things happening around the time of this 2.2 release. And of course, now's a good time for people to ask us about what's going to be in 2.3 and tell us what they want to be in 2.3.
Yeah, so if anyone does have any questions, it doesn't have to be related to these new features. Anything related to the driver is fair game. Feel free to use the chat to ask.
Or voice if you've got voice.
We didn't do the voice.
Oh, you muted everybody? Okay, we can.
I believe we did. I think you can unmute yourself if you want to do voice. Let us know if you can't.
No, it makes it easier.
Are you allowed to tell us what's coming in 2.3?
Yeah. I mean, there's no secrets here. It's just laziness on my part for sort of telling people what we're kind of thinking about. And of course, being open source, there's kind of no guarantees. Anthony gets an itch and he has to go and scratch it, so some new feature pops up, or some big customer question pops up internally, so we spend some time on that, and something has to be cut from the list. The big thing from our point of view is we've got the big Oracle Open World Conference coming up in, when is that, end of September or October? I forget when it is, around that time frame, October. And so basically everything is really, really slammed for us. So we try and give you something interesting so we can talk about it at the conference, B, actually do it, because we're so busy trying to do everything else, prepare sessions and travel and demo booths and things like that, we don't just look after Node, we look after a whole bunch of other technologies. So we kind of try and balance that out, but we may or may not slip another little small release in between then. Our testers have identified a memory leak here or there, so we've got at least 1 or 2 fixes we do want to push out. Whether we do a 2.2.x or whether we go straight to a 2.3 is kind of to be debated. What else do I have on my list? I mean, I'm still keen on some of these statement control things. We can expose a couple of features which are really part of Oracle Net Layer in terms of connection timeouts and packet timeouts across the network. So we can actually give you another attribute in the code to specify a timeout for that connection. So if there's nothing happening across that connection at a certain time, basically it can give you more control in the application without you having to go and configure that SQLnet.aura file and set those things up there. So I'm keen on those things. I don't know whether they'll make it. You may know that version 18 of Oracle Database is out on Oracle Cloud, and that has yet one other attribute there in terms of timeouts. And so we're kind of trying to wait for that to go more public before we actually push some of these things out, because then they'll be more readily available to people once 18C Instant Client is out. And I don't have any timing on that. But certainly the doc's all online, so you can go and see the doc on that. What else do I have on my kind of rough list?
I hope Anthony gets an itch on AQ or CQN.
Yeah, those are bigger things with bigger questions about how the API is going to look and what makes it easy, what we can abstract, because they're big Oracle features with lots of controls, and we don't want to make Node as complex as that. So a lot of bike shedding discussions about, hey, we should do this, but that restricts that, and users want to do that. So we've seen some questions on the forum for proxy users and connection pools, kind of variant from using the client ID. So maybe that's something we might get in. Sharding support. So sharding was a big Oracle database feature recently in the 12 timeframe. And so there's a little bit of pressure internally for us to support our own features, and certainly some customers have been looking at that. So that's really just a few connection attributes to specify the shard behaviors. More a matter of us getting testing, just getting time to create all the tests and things and resources and what have you to do that. What else have I got on my list? Success with info errors. I saw that pop up. So these, by the way, again, definitely we need that disclaimer. Don't make your purchasing decisions on this. I don't know whether you can find that slide quickly, Dan, and we can put that. Questions about detecting OCI success with info errors. That needs a change down in ODPI, I think, the abstraction layer. And then, yes, I do have on the kind of hot list, the object binding. So people have been looking for binding an object. So you take a node object and you bind it directly into a PL SQL or SQL object. vice versa. Call timeouts, nested fetch, so nested cursors, and AQ. Those are the sort of hot things, but they're also bigger things. So you may see just this mix of one big thing and then a few smaller things in each release. So those are basically what I have on my list. There's nothing private really about it. If you look at the GitHub issues list, you see everybody's got their requests out there. So those are really what we're basing it off. Plus, all of the other things which we know would be kind of nice to do to improve a test here or a document, improve documentation there, or work more on rack and things like that. So there's a billion things to do: logging, tracing, whatever else you want. Just let us know.
Excellent. A lot to look forward to.
Yeah. So at some stage it'll come up. I don't know when. Let me just pop up for the official purposes this disclaimer, the safe harbor statement. So it's there in the record. Basically, don't buy anything based on what I just said, because it's all subject to change.
He found it.
Yeah. This is my Oracle code presentation coming up.
Cool. Well, I did not see any questions pop up in the queue, so I guess we'll go ahead and call it there then. Thank you, Chris. Thanks, Anthony. And
no problem.
Thank you, everybody, for joining. And hopefully we'll see you. Go on.
Yeah, and for contributing as well, too. Because they
absolutely
contribute on the issues list. Yep.
Yeah. Hope to see you in about a month. Take care, everybody.
Okay.
Yep.
Breakfast time. See ya.